Hello, I want to welcome everyone to the Power of Our Story. And today we have Sergeant Christopher Gregorio facilitating our group today. And we are all excited about that. So Chris, you want to share the topic for the day and I'll hand it over to you.
I do, but I think I would be remiss if I started before saying that the Power of Our Story has been linked up with Chris Hoyer and Glenn Williams, and we're going to be at the National Law Enforcement Survival Summit in Las Vegas with the Wounded Blue. That's September 26th through the 29th. So if you have any power in your way to be there and you'd like to be a part of that, it is a very powerful and impactful event to be a part of. So if you have any questions on it, you can either hit any of us up or reach out to Randy Sutton at the woundedblue.org, I believe is what it is. So moving forward, I think a great topic of conversation to have, and this is truly just a roundtable. So not really guided in a real particular way, but want your guys' life experiences and advice for first responders about being all in. I think oftentimes many of us are very all in, and at some point we become Leroy Jenkins, what I call Leroy Jenkins all in, which can be not a very healthy, good thing for us as individuals and as well as our families. And then the second part of that topic I'd like to get you guys' take on is very oftentimes first responders live two separate lives. They have their work life and they have their home life, and they generally don't cross the two. And I'd like your guys' opinion. I'll throw my opinion out there in a little bit, but as to whether you think that's the right thing, whether that's the wrong thing, if there's a blend, and what your experience has been on either side of that, or if you've done both. Let's just kind of open it up with being all in. I think that there's a point, and we do this very well in the military too. We'll call it indoctrination, where you have to have your buy-in to get everybody all in. And I think that we actually do a very good job of getting that. We all join service for a particular reason, but once we're all bought in and have been indoctrinated, if you will, we do a very horrible job institutionally across all these lines of service of recognizing, of coming off of that, being all in and not being whatever service you're in, whether it be military service or some sort of first responder. And oftentimes these jobs take over as our identity. That's all we are. So at what point do you think that we need to organizationally or systemically across the board start enforcing into people outside life that we are something more than whatever line of service that you're in? And I'll just kind of open that up from there. Jim.
Well, from my experience, everybody talks about a life-work balance, right? And I've always had conversations with people when I was in a leadership role of, the importance of a life-work balance, and always clarified that with, don't use me as an example, because my life-work balance was not balanced. Although I had a lot of life stuff that I did, there wasn't necessarily a balance to it. I was all in, and I was all in for many, many decades, type of an approach. As far as like when do we start this process? I have come through some other work I've been doing to be a firm believer that it needs to start, the conversations need to start in the academies with people at the very beginning of their career. First day on the job type of stuff, whether it's talking about life-work balance, whether it's talking about mental wellness, etc., leadership, all of that stuff. We need to start introducing these concepts, maybe small bites, appropriate level, etc., at the very beginning of people's careers, so that it sets them off on the right path down the road. In 1981-ish, we didn't talk about pretty much any of that stuff when I first started in the profession. So
Did I hear you just admitting, Jim, to being Leroy Jenkins all in for most of your career?
Oh yeah.
So do as I say, not as I do. Okay, and real quickly, and we'll get to everybody on that. But what was the byproduct of you being all in? What was the cost to you and your family?
I would say, generally speaking, when I was, before I promoted to, chief officer and stuff, I had a lot more, even though I was all in what I did in the career, and I was able to coach Little League, and I was able to, take my son on his trips and things like that. But there was just that unavailability on special occasions, because, hey, there was an overtime opportunity, I took it, right?
So not just scheduled, all the extra stuff that you took voluntarily.
Oh yeah, and I was the association president for 4 years. I did labor negotiations and all that stuff. And so yes, my family sacrificed because I was giving to, whether it be the employment organization or the labor group or the community in some fashion. I was heavily engaged in doing all that stuff, and it did take away from family time, right? I was fortunate. My wife, when my kids were in probably first or second grade, my wife stopped working, right? So she was home, able to do all the shuttling and activities and that type of stuff. But I don't know, school field trips, never went on one of those. That type of thing.
Yeah, your selfless sacrifice was the selfish sacrifice of everybody else around you. Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Paul.
To answer your question about what we shared with at home, I limited that to the humorous things that occurred on the job. And that seemed to satisfy the need to know what I was out there doing. And so that's kind of the balance I struck. I didn't feel any need or any desire to share anything that was traumatic or ugly or whatever. And so if I just stuck to the humorous things, and there, with me, there were always humorous things. Some folks didn't view it that way, but I did. And so that's what I shared. And that worked out very well for us.
And looking back, would you have changed that? Or
No.
was that the happy balance for you?
That didn't happen overnight, but when it occurred to me that there were things that I could share and other things that I shouldn't share, I had to figure out what those were. And when I figured out that the humorous part was sufficient to meet the need of my family wanting to know what I'd done on the job and that kind of thing, and they'd say, "How did your day go?" And I'd start in on them with the funny stuff, and that seemed to meet the need. And so I never changed it all the time I was there.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. And I think that's a good way to at least it's going to be different for everybody. That's definitely a good way, is to share the positive things, obviously, and the humorous things. And I'm sorry, things are moving around here, so I'm going to call what's kind of next on my screen. Goodell.
Oh, hey, Chris, just to let you
yep.
know, Michael Parker's hand is up. He's first in line.
Oh,
I can help you with that. I see that you're on your phone, so I can help you with
Perfect.
that.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Parker.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think for like the Marines, they tell you you're a Marine 24/7, right? Which I guess puts in your mind that you're always a Marine and you're never your individual self, which I think is a bad freaking way to look at things. And I agree with Jim. Like you should have that talks early on. Now, our organizations like the Marine Corps are going to teach you to look into what is important to you as an individual. No, because they want you to be a Marine 24/7. That's why they tell you that. You're a Marine on or off duty. So in that regards, I think it's got to come from outside sources to come in and get guys to open up and figure out who they are. Because a lot of times we're waiting until people transition out of service to really dive into who they are, and then they're struggling because they have that loss of purpose. Whereas if they figured out who they were and you're you and a Marine at the same time, you're not going to struggle in getting out because you already know who you are. So it's going to make that transition a lot easier, versus having to spend months, years, darkest moments of your life that could have been avoided if you were able to figure that out a long time before. I had something else, but that's all I got.
Let me ask you a question. I know you said that the Marine Corps and the Army and all those things probably won't change those things, but I remember having maybe it was last year, a conversation about the resiliency and training in what to expect to how to process what they teach us how to do in the military, right? With Doc Shauna Springer, and she's got a lot of impact there on the national level. From your perspective, when in the military, if we could do it, at what point would you start to transition out of that, soldier 24/7? Because there is absolutely a place for that, right? Especially as you're training up and you're doing training maneuvers and getting ready to go down range. But at what point do you think it would be appropriate if you could wave a magic wand in the Army, we call it MRT, Master Resiliency Program, Master Resiliency Training, to start to transition away and say, hey, yeah, you can still be all in, but being a soldier, being a Marine, being an airman is not all that you are. Hey, let's focus on these other things.
I have, yeah, that's a good question. I have two ideas on that. One, obviously, when you're going through like basic training, boot camp, combat training, MOS school, all those schools, definitely all in, because you need to attain all of that. But maybe when you get to your unit and now because during that period, you are a Marine 24/7, like you might get weekend liberty and get to go off and get in trouble for a weekend, but you're constantly, the military's property 24/7. I mean, you are regardless, but you know what I mean?
Yep.
And then you go to your unit and now you're on like a shift work. So you have that time where, you can be you. And so I think that would be a good time to do it. Or you could also, then, deployments and being all in. Okay, well then maybe a year out, instead of 6 weeks before you get out, here's a 3-day class on how to be a civilian again. And they don't really teach you that stuff. So I would say maybe a year out, getting guys to go out and, determine what is important to them. So, they've got a year to start planning for that separation and become themselves versus just a few days.
Okay. So if I heard you right, what I'm hearing you say in some ways is once you get back to unit, maybe that becomes like a first line leader thing, that now you're all in, but those first line leaders, your team leaders, your squad leaders can then start helping you transition in a way to add on to, not take away from service, but add on to another layer of your identity. Because so many of us joined at 17, 18, 19 years old. Am I hearing you right in that?
Yeah, I mean, and two, I think that would help with a lot with the cultural issues, right? Like Marines are notorious for drinking and getting in trouble. Why? Because we're taught we're to be a Marine all the time. So we don't know what's important to us. So what do we do with our free time? We sit in the barracks and drink and cause trouble. And then you have this alcohol problem. But hey, if I knew I like to go do this, then I'm going to get out and do that more often.
And for me, that was a big thing, and it really kind of redefined my definition of family, is that I had a lot of, being a single soldier, a lot of the married folks taking me in, bringing me in for their family holidays and things like that, which, leads you to having more than just that barracks life. You did those things as well, but then, because you're around family and kids and things like that, it keeps you a little bit more grounded. You're not going to be fighting amongst, your peers and seniors, family and things like that. Thank you for sharing that. Sarah, who's next on there?
Goodell.
What's up, brother?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Good, man.
It's good to see you. First off, I want to say congratulations on making sergeant.
Thanks, man.
Birds of the grapevine, man. It's pretty awesome.
It's a very blessed opportunity. I'm humbled to be able to serve and see how this goes going forward.
Yeah, awesome, man. I'm so happy for you. Hey, so I mean, to answer your question, I think for me, it's more of I'll put in the sense of bullet points, if you will. There's positives, right? To the differentiation, I mean, if you will, of that, whether the private life or that work life or the balance, or trying to find anything in between. Positives, man, I'll tell you, there's a sense of purpose that's pretty awesome. You know, you have an opportunity to make a positive impact on people's lives, and this is military, is first responder, fire, EMT, I mean, you name it. Obviously, us as law enforcement, or those of us that have worn or wear both hats, you know, still like you, Chris, super grateful for your service. There's that making a difference, right? We make a difference that to the communities that we serve, a difference that's tangible, I think. And I think you get super rewarding, and we can get, you know, addicted to that, or it's like, man, I'm actually making something happen. The team camaraderie, I mean, a varied work environment, because it's like no typical days the same. Skill development, you know, with people skills, communication skills, and all that. But then there's like the negative side, right? High stress and trauma, the irregular hours, risk of injury or injured and then come back, the impact on personal life, obviously the mental health challenges that some of us face, the public scrutiny that can sometimes even spill over into your personal life or your families. So whatever the role is, I mean, I think there's it's incredibly rewarding. But I think serving the communities, despite the difficulties, is what puts us, you know, a cut above everybody else, maybe. And I know we've all had that sense of purpose somehow, some way. And I guess we try to continue to serve no matter what we do with the orgs now, or the orgs that we serve and stuff like that. So, yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
Very true. And I think that's why so many of us get into this, is it's extremely rewarding and we want to have a positive impact. You know, I'll just say this, that all the opinions and things that are on here are just that, and understanding that there's no perfect solutions. You know, Thomas Sowell says there's no solutions, just trade-offs. Everything we do is trading off for something. You're not going to, you know, be able to eat your cake and eat it too, if you will. You know, I've said several times that many of my professional successes have come from being a failure in my personal life in a lot of different ways. And that's what I would like to, you know, kind of convey, that is to try to find to where you can be super successful in one, but you're going to fall short somewhere else. And I'd rather be pretty close to equal on both sides, because there's no way to be superior at both. There's absolutely going to be a cost. Thank you, Goodell. Sarah, who is up next?
Michelle. Good
My
to see
turn.
Miss Franklin, congratulations on your new venture.
Thank you. Thank you. You too. It sounds like we're both moving up in the world.
Trying to.
So I kind of, two different perspectives from my career. When I was in middle school, my dad entered the California Highway Patrol Academy. And, you know, yes, he was older at the time. They called him Grandpa. But I went through that experience of knowing and having to learn from my mom, like, this is your dad's training time. When we get weekends with him, like me and my brothers and my sisters just knew that it was mom and dad time. Mom got priority, but it was also seemed like kind of superficial, because dad couldn't invest too much, because Sunday night he was driving back up to Sacramento and trying to get that mindset back for training. But I think when I think back of that, and then growing up with him working overtime, my mom being a nurse in the prisons, like, it would have been so interesting to have maybe the Highway Patrol put on a program for the families to say, this is what you might expect. Children, here's you know what you might expect. Here's some coping methods. Here's what you can do. You know, I think it would have been interesting to come in from that point of it, just because of being the child and not really understanding. Like, my dad was a farmer, and now all of a sudden he carries a gun and he's teaching me how to watch my surroundings. Like, very different culture change, I think.
Yeah. And what were those effects for you?
I think that it's kind of, it's weird because the effects for me, I don't think were negative. I think they were very positive, and that's what drove me to join law enforcement as a dispatcher. But I watched my brother go down a road where it wasn't the best. It was very negative on him. And I don't think that relationship was built strongly between him and my dad. So I got to see like a few different turnouts, but then I noticed when I started my own career, like I was 19, so I was single, no kids. So I fully like submerged myself into the culture, and I felt proud. I felt like I was making my dad proud. And so it was kind of a positive thing at first for me until I started realizing that became my second family, my law enforcement family. So anytime I dated someone who was outside of law enforcement, besides like completely like running down their record and their background and everything, if I ever brought them around, they were kind of shunned. They were pushed to the outside. So I went through that and almost like being trained that I need to date and stay within law enforcement, which I'm fully against now. But then I got to go through the other change of having my daughter when I was 30, and I was 3/4 of the way into my career. And I think when you bring your own children into the mix, you go through another transition where you start to realize, well, we want our family involved. We want to be able to bring your daughter to work day. You want to be able to do that stuff. But the law enforcement culture almost doesn't promote that type of family dynamic. I work at a university right now where they're doing family nights 2 to 3 times a month, where bring your whole family. My whole team has already met my family. Like, it is so different from me. So I kind of feel like all those different perspectives weaved their way in when you started asking the questions.
I'm sorry, my phone just froze up there at the last second. I apologize. Yes, that's very true. And what I've kind of heard here is that, what do they say? We're still kind of growing up until we're 25. We're not fully grown up and all those things till we're 25, right? So as we're growing up, 17, 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, maybe that's part of the problem is we're still learning who we are as individuals, but then when you join these organizations, and that becomes what you're learned to be as. That's a great point to pick up on. Thank you, Michelle. Who
All
we
right.
got next, Sarah?
Terry, and by the way, congratulations. She passed her national board certification.
Thank
Yay,
you.
Terry.
And congratulations, Sarge and Michelle.
Thank you.
So on the heels of what Jim said about learning the life job balance, I am a strong believer that that also needs to be touched on and drilled into the cadets in any first responder field. On top of that, I really believe that there needs to be a flip side of that in also implementing financial wellness. And the reason why I'm going down that route is because all too often you get on the job, you can work a couple overtimes, you can work the details, and for the most part, it's easy money. So then you go out. I love Patrick's still face on that camera.
Always smiling.
And then you go out and you start looking for the new vehicles or the new house. You lock yourself into these larger payments. And what do? We strap ourselves in.
You live off that overtime.
Correct. So, and
It's not guaranteed.
No, it isn't guaranteed. So on the heels of that, implementing financial wellness, and also for the younger officers getting in, like on my agency, there were the policies and procedures. We weren't allowed to work any more than 16 hours straight. Anything over that, we would have to get permission. And typically that was only granted if it was an emergency. and you needed to have X amount of hours in between shifts in order to work again, right? So one of the things that, as far as the financial wellness, is for these newer officers to live on a balanced income, learning how not to overspend and lock themselves into that expense that they have to work, but also investing at a younger age, so that when they are older in years, not only do they have their pension, but they also have that added income or security blanket. And then they are living comfortably, so they don't, when they finally do move into retirement, they have that little nest egg. And then part of that was learning how not to overspend when they had the overtime or the details. So
That's great advice.
from the
great advice.
start in the academy, absolutely.
And I think that unintentionally, maybe that actually falls under emotional intelligence, right? I mean, if you can keep those things in check, that's one emotion that you're not going to be fighting about money at home. There's other things you can fight about, but that's one of the huge ones that cost us our marriages and things like that. So if you have the emotional intelligence to keep that track down, then that's a big win for sure. Now, you talked about doing it at the very beginning, just like Jim. But I remember them talking about this stuff in the academy. Don't be the used to guy. What's a used to? Well, I used to play basketball. I used to go do this. I used to do that. I used to, play sports and hang out with all my buddies, but now I don't any longer for whatever reason. Also, don't, I'll have friends outside of law enforcement. So they talk about it. It's a lot of great lip service, but why don't you guys think that we end up doing it? We don't follow it for whatever reason. We get hooked into whatever it is. I'm not sure. Just throwing that out there.
Chris, on the heels of that, the other thing that I would really like to see implemented on the recruit side, the younger individuals moving into the first responders position or even the military, helping them understand that it's okay to say that I'm not doing that great. The flip side of that is administration, chiefs need to understand that when you have an officer reaching out for help, it's not a weakness. And instead of instilling the fear that this officer needs help with something, emotional or mental, instead of instilling the fear that if you reach out to help, we're going to take your weapon, you're working with that officer so that they don't go down that path and that they're able to keep their job and thrive.
Yeah, that's a weird dichotomy, right? Because we preach about those things to say, hey, I need help. I'm not doing okay right now. Just a quick side story, and I'm sorry, we'll continue on. I was doing one of my leadership classes in the military, and third night of class, I had one of the students, you guys have talked to him, Dusky Van Ness. He calls me up and says, hey, Sarge, I'm not doing good. I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to go in the ocean and I'm going to kill myself. But he calls me. So me and some other folks go out and grab him, take him to the hospital, and all these things. So now we're in a class setting. He's at the hospital talking to whoever he's got to talk to. And I go and talk to the powers that be, and they're like, okay, we got to send this guy home. So why are we going to send him home? This is going to punish a guy. If he doesn't finish this class, he's not going to get his promotion. That promotion hinged on his job that he had. He was just put in the active guard, which is a full-time job. And if he doesn't get promoted, he's going to lose that job and that money. How likely is he going to be to ask for help again, number one, or to complete what he just intended to do before asking for help? So we say, ask for help. We say, hey, I'm not doing good right now. But then in the name of self-preservation and not having something bad happen with somebody, we say, hey, let's just dismiss it. Now we're punishing exactly people for what we're doing. So they're like, we got to send him home. I said, don't send him home. He's going to complete what he just started. And I said, I'll watch him. That's not your job. I said, but it is. This is a leadership school. Is this not exactly what we should be teaching them? So they ultimately ended up letting him stay, and he ended up graduating as an honor graduate. So it was a very, very awesome, fulfilling thing. But you're right. Culturally, we have to change that. We can't just worry about liability and things like that. You have to read the situation, read the individual. If you truly don't think that they're good, cool. But it can't be because they reached out and said, "Hey, I need some help. I'm in a really bad spot right now." So thank you so much for bringing that up, Terry. And I didn't mean to dominate the time there. Sarah, who is next?
Yeah, that was good. Jim.
So I was going to follow up on a couple things. So, we talk about some of the stuff that early on, one of the organizations that I worked for, we did a couple things. One, when we were actually testing, right? So we were taking applications, we hosted an orientation night where we invited not only the potential applicant, but their spouse, significant other, whatever, to be there to have some dialogue and to start some of that, this is what your other half is going to be getting themselves into type of a thing for those that weren't maybe in the know. We also had a spouse family component to our wellness program, where we held certain workshops and stuff for couples or whatever. So we tried to address some of that stuff in those arenas. And again, some of that goes back to that starting early in the career for people. As far as the questions that were asked about, sharing and what you talk about at home and things like that, my wife was in the business. She was a dispatcher. She worked for the agency that managed the countywide radio system and dispatch system. So she and I had the opportunity to talk to each other occasionally on the radio and such. So that was an interesting dynamic sometimes. But she knew, right? She knew what I was doing, but she also didn't know what I was doing, right? So there was that. She knew that I was on a particular call, but she might not know all the details that I chose not to share or whatever. As a result of her involvement in the business, she had her own trauma, right? That ended her career basically. And some of that she too shared, right? But some of it she didn't share. And so it really, she stopped working in 2001. It was just, I don't know, 10 months ago or something that we sat down and shared our stories with each other. Some information that had never been divulged to each other. So, that probably wasn't the best, our situation could have been totally different or better or whatever, based on the stuff that we were no longer keeping from each other if we'd have shared it, much earlier in our careers. As far as like sharing with your children, again, I protected them. I didn't really come home and talk too much about, the stuff that went on. But through my other speaking engagements and stuff in the last few years, I've had the opportunity to tell my story and talk about some of that trauma and different things that affected me through my career. And it was recorded. And so I was able to share that with my kids who are now in their early 30s. And, like my son said, I had no idea, the stuff that affected me, that kept me away from the family or that I didn't share, and how that impacted me, and probably led to how I treated them or how I interacted with them that they maybe didn't like. But he had a different understanding for it now because he had no idea what I was going through at the time. So.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad that after 20 some odd years, you were able to figure that out. If you had to do it again, would you share more earlier than what you did with what you just said?
I would probably still be reserved on, the gory stuff or whatever, right?
Sure.
But I think I would be more open to, hey, I had a bad incident last night. I'm going to need some time to go, fix myself or, whatever.
Process.
Probably have a little bit more of that, I'll say surface level conversation, not the specific details, but this is what's happening, right? As opposed to, just coming home and going and closing the door and sitting in the room by myself, type of thing.
Well, thank you. You opened the door, so I'm gonna jump in here for just a second. We've talked about this a little bit. From an early age with my kids, I haven't shared a lot of gore and things like that. I don't think that's necessary. But I think that there's a lot of life lessons that can be learned while the kids and your spouses see that mom or dad's struggling. Then they know why. But then also we try to teach our kids how to handle adversity and handle all these different things. But then they're also seeing it. Mom or dad is living it in real time. They can see, hey, dad's going through this or mom's going through this. Okay, this is a rough time, but look, they made it through it. You're not just talking about it. They're actually seeing it. They're seeing that you have those rough days, and they're seeing that it should be okay to have those rough days. I think there's so much value in them seeing how you live. That's why I don't say any longer lead by example, just live by example. If you can do that in some ways. Second, with your spouses, we're going to dump somewhere. And we've said we're all in when we said, I do to your spouses, except for that part, right? But there's a level of betrayal that kind of comes there from the spouses, as I've learned, as I've tried to grow up a little bit, that I'm not good enough for you to talk to about this stuff, but I'm good for other things. Why am I not good enough? And what I found is that, at least for my spouse, she doesn't necessarily want to hear all the details, which is great. She can hear that, somebody died or this happened, but then she understands she can actually kind of gauge me and see how I'm processing it. Am I being a little bit short? I've been very clear here several times that I don't always know when I'm being short, and she's quick to let me know in the right ways, so that I can adjust my attitude or recognize it. So they married all of us, every part of us. So my advice would be to share some of that stuff so that they can understand why. And then you don't have that betrayal of like you're talking to your buddies, or even worse in their minds, especially if you're a man, you're talking to some female cop or whatever. You can talk to that female, but not me. And that can lead into a lot of other things. So thank you for bringing that up, Jim. And I'm glad that you guys were able to, after 20 years, open that up. Sarah.
Yeah, and just to hop in, it seems to me too, kids will not take it personally when they understand more that there's something going on behind it, and also spouses too. So love the conversation.
100%. And that's where, your kids are like, oh, I didn't know. And that makes sense. But if we can do that in the moment rather than 20 or 30 years later, I think that's a huge win.
Yeah. Yeah. And Michael is deferring to Catherine.
Miss Boyle, great to see you again.
Thanks, Michael. Good to see you. And obviously I have so many thoughts and they're very scrambled, but one thing that keeps coming up in my head, I've talked about this before, but my dad was 30 when he became a cop, and we've talked about this a lot just today. Like the fact that he had so much life experience under his belt made such a huge difference. He maintained all the friendships from his childhood. He knew how to handle finances. He knew exactly who he was when he became a cop. So he was really able to kind of create that separation of church and state, so to speak, because he really did know who he was. And as a result, and obviously this isn't a realistic way because most people don't become cops when they're 30, but as a result, he tried to impart that wisdom and that knowledge and understanding on anyone who reported into him, who was coming in at a young age. He did lead by example, but he was known for hosting little seminars for the people who worked for him so that he could try to teach them his ways as best he could. And that had a huge impact on the people who worked for him. And policing is about impacting people, not just the victims out on the street, but also those men and women who look up to you and report into you. And he really did have a huge impact on those people. And as far as, talking about it at home, I didn't know what my dad did. He was lieutenant, but I thought he had an office job, a really cool office job. And again, as a lieutenant, he was in an office a lot of the times, but he went on to scenes. He went and saw very traumatic things. He participated in stakeouts, like he did all the things. And I had no idea. All I knew was that there was a TV show called Law and Order that mirrored what he did. And yeah, so we didn't know what he went through, but he also didn't really bring it home. I think part of that is because he did talk about it with my mom. He kept some of the graphics out of it, but he did talk with her about what he saw. And then two, I'm not sure who made this point about like speaking to female officers or other officers and not talking to your partner can be impactful, negatively impactful. My parents were very much a unit. So my dad would have his police friends who were married, and they became like couple friends with my parents. So my dad, so for example, his partner once upon a time and his wife were very good friends with my dad and my mom. Like they would go out on double dates and they would go to each other's houses and hang out together, and the guys could talk about the guys' things and the ladies could talk about the ladies' things. And it just created a lot of synchronicity in the relationship and how my dad, I think, was able to kind of handle some of those things that he did experience on the job. Yeah, like I said, I'm like all scattered brained right now, and I have so many thoughts on this topic, like you guys know. But I think that's where I'll leave it for now.
Catherine, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And I think that you could be a counselor in this realm, to be honest with you, based on your life story, because we don't hear it from the family members so much. So it is very, very cool and refreshing to hear that perspective, especially since yours is so stinking positive. I think that it's like a roadmap of how to navigate a lot of that stuff for many people in the right way.
It's funny you say that, because my mom told me the other day that his cop friends would always ask my parents, like, what did you do? Why are your kids so well functioning, so good, so close to you? Like, what did you do that I didn't do? And my mom and dad would always respond like, I don't know, but if I could bottle it and sell it, I would be really, really rich. And then she was like, so what I think you're trying to do is bottle and sell what we could never figure out.
No doubt. No doubt. Thank you for sharing that, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Sarah,
Michael.
who's up now?
Michael?
Yeah,
All
so a few points on things that were talked about. One, like, I think I've said it on here before. My dad, he just retired after over 30 years in the military. Like 17, 18 of that was as a criminal investigator. And, I saw with him, and, as I grow up, like a lot on that point of not knowing then and then figuring out later. Like if he had been a little more open, I think it would have helped our relationship. Like him and I have a much better relationship now that I went to the Marine Corps, and I realized on my own, why my dad was the way he was. It progressed from like, oh, my dad's just an asshole, right? But then I realized, oh, like as I was a Marine, I started seeing the same tendencies in myself. I was like, oh, my dad's like that because of the military. Now when I look back, I'm like, no, my dad's like that because he has trauma that he's not addressed. And so I can see that, and it's helped us in our relationship. But if my dad was a little more, and I know there was a lot of things he couldn't talk about, and like he was always gone places, and I wouldn't know until he came back and brought me back a flag, and I'll be like, oh, that's where he was for a week. Okay. But if I had been able to, or he had just said, hey, like I've got this stuff going on, like you were talking about, it would definitely helped our relationship. So I was like, well, I don't want to be like that going forward. I don't have kids yet, but at least I put a lot of work into myself, so when I know I'll be ready when that day comes.
I saw you balancing on that yoga ball.
Getting my practice in. All right. Yeah, so yeah, you just messed up my whole train of thought, dude.
Sorry, brother. Sorry.
But yeah, so that's just my perspective as a child of somebody in the military. You don't have to share all the details. Just be like, hey, look, dad's gone, had to go through some stuff, right? Or mom, if your mom's in the military, you're the mom of kids and you're in the military. Hey, look, I've had a rough time. I've been through some stuff. I think that would have helped a lot. Now,
Was that kid, would that have made you feel more included, a little bit more important?
yeah, it was just, oh, dad's gonna be gone for a while, and that's it. I mean, he was good about like writing postcards. Like I have a stack, probably like, I don't know, I have a box of postcards. He would always send a postcard. So
Right.
he like did stuff to try to make us know he was thinking about him. So I got all these cool postcards with different military vehicles on them from every time he was gone. But
Sure.
it was when he came back, he'd be different, right? And not addressing that. Like I think that would have helped a lot as well. And then the other point I was going to talk about was something that you mentioned earlier, is like we get a lot of this education in the military. Like they talk to you about a lot of this stuff, but I think it's in the way that they do it. Like we go through annual classes on all of this stuff, but you don't want to sit there and watch PowerPoints for an hour on this stuff. Guess what? That's an hour nap time, and I'm getting paid to do it. Like I'm not going to sit there and listen to like a chaplain blab on and on for an hour. So if they change the way they presented it, like, around mental health, like, okay, instead of just talking about it, let's get out and do stuff that improves our mental health, like, and two, you can say it all you want, but if you're not demonstrating it, and that's a big issue, is all these commanders, they come, you get a new commander, he comes in, he's like, hey guys, I got an open door policy. Nobody's going to take advantage of that because it's an open door policy, but then you go in there and you feel like it's more like you're in trouble for going in there to seek help.
Sure.
Than it is actually a help. And, like, so if I would say, like, if commanders and, in the military, senior leaders, I guess chiefs, lieutenants, whatever, and law enforcement, if they were more involved and they're out there, like if I saw my CO coming around, like, hey Parker, how you doing today? Like, how's everything going at home? And actually caring about their troops, not just sitting up in an office saying, hey, yeah, you can come in here if you have a problem. Well, I don't know you, so I'm not going to come in there. And as far as I know, like, we're kind of taught, like, you don't want to go to the sergeant major's office. You don't want to go to the CO's office. Like, that's a bad thing. So to have to go to those people for help, it's like a negative connotation in your head. So if you can change
Sounds
that
like what you're
narrative
bringing
around
up
it-
is authentic leadership,
yeah.
not just checking the boxes.
Yeah. And that's all it is with like those classes. Like we have to educate these guys on this. So let's give them this PowerPoint on, hey, this is what mental health is, and this is a signs, this is what you do for help. And it's just like checking boxes instead of actually caring.
Yeah.
So what if instead you're like, hey, we have to, it's time for our annual training on mental health. How about we do this thing? Like we go to this place and have them spend time with horses, or we go get out and do whatever, something that takes the guys out of their normal environment, gives them the time to kind of decompress, and then you give those classes on. But sitting there death by PowerPoint, like nobody's going to learn anything about it.
Well, just at that point, you guys were all very impactful to my soldiers this summer and last fall. And this kind of forum here that we're doing is the best kind of, resiliency, suicide prevention training that I think you can do. It gets rid of all the PowerPoints, and it's real people talking real stories, like Sarah was just saying. It truly is the power of our story. Thank you, Michael, for saying that. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. We're getting close to 12. So Sarah, who's up next?
We got Michelle and then Paul.
All right, Michelle.
So I just wanted to add in there, one of the biggest things I've learned on my journey since I was diagnosed with PTSD is my family is a lot more resilient than I give them credit for. And I've started learning, I brought in 2 stepchildren, or soon to be stepchildren, and they've been with me for just over 3 years now. And I've started slowly like letting them know what's going on. Or even my 5-year-old, when I would come home from work and, Mama, why are you sad? And, well, Mama had a really, really hard day today. Somebody got hurt. And just that simple, like no details, it was like, okay, like Mom's not mad at me, and my stepson, he's 12 now. I've started sharing a little bit more and more, age appropriate, obviously, but like it doesn't affect them the way it affects us. We're the ones who are suffering from the trauma or the exposure to traumatic events. They aren't. So I don't think that we give them enough credit for the resiliency that they naturally have. And once you learn that, I think it becomes easier to include your family. My fiance told me straight up, he's like, stop making the decisions for what I can handle. Let me tell you what I can handle.
How many of us have heard that before?
I've heard it a few times.
And I think that we think that we're protecting, and actually sometimes the feeling that they actually get out of that is exclusion. All right, Paul. Thank you, Michelle. You're still muted, brother.
Thank
There
you.
you are.
Michael Parker brought this up or made mention of it. If the training that is done for preparation for termination from service prepares somebody to understand that when they take that uniform off for the last time, all they've done is change their clothes. So many people have come to understand that their identity is their uniform, and it's not. And the second thing is there is a stigma in response to a request for help, and that comes from senior leaders who have been around for a very long time, and that's what they were taught. And those before them were taught the same thing. And so there is a strong need to train the senior leaders in, I don't care whether it's EMS, firefighters, police, any first responder, military, to understand that when somebody asks for help, that is an act of courage and not an act of weakness.
100%.
The last thing I'll leave you with is somebody mentioned an open door policy. Well, I had that. And two of my officers, when I was out on the streets, were in the station. They took the hinges off the doors and removed the door to my office as a method of reinforcing the open policy idea. And so I just hung a note on the door frame. The open door policy continues, and whoever took the door, please bring it back.
That's funny.
I just left it at that, and the door showed up the next day. So
Hilarious. Thank you for sharing that, Paul.
thank you guys for all that you've contributed today, each of you. I love you all.
Absolutely.
Chris, here's
Jim,
Jim.
go ahead.
Do you have enough time for that?
I do, yes.
I just, Paul said something about the senior leaders and educating them, and they learned it from their senior leaders. It's just, and I phrase this in this way. It's, generally speaking, a child that grows up in an abusive household is very likely to be abusive when they're an adult, right? And the same thing happens in the work environment. If you're just learning from the predecessors, whatever they were taught by their predecessor, that's how you're raised. That's most likely how you're going to behave. And you're right, Paul. We have to change some of the work has to be done at the top to change that type of behavior, that type of thing.
100%. It goes back to that word culture someone typed in earlier, right?
Exactly. And to Paul's comment about the door, I once had to do that door removal thing, on my son's bedroom.
He didn't have an open door policy.
I made it an open door policy.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. Sarah, would you like to close anything out here?
Oh, I just wanted to thank you. I have been sitting here thinking this must be so helpful for first responders that are active duty to hear you all share your life experience. I think it's just very generous. So I want to thank you all. Chris, once again, you just do a great job. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And just want to throw back out there one more time. September 26th through the 29th, Wounded Blue Summit, woundedblue.org. You got the opportunity to come join us. If you got any questions, hit us up.